Hello and welcome to the Human Side of Real Estate podcast. My name is Mark Toomey. I'm managing partner of Tara HRC, which is a boutique real estate headhunting company based in Warsaw, Poland. My guest today is Tomasz Klodowski, aka TK, one of the most well-known and well-liked people in Central European real estate. A man with so many great stories and experiences, he could surely launch his own weekly podcast just to talk about himself. And I would definitely listen in every week. So for the past 22 years, up until recently, TK was Managing Director of European Operations for Stewart Title. TK, great to see you. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
So how are you doing?
Good. I'm embarking on the new chapter of life. I transitioned from Stewart's managing director role to kind of an interim position of consultancy and trying to figure out the next chapter. So I'm excited about what lays ahead of me. A few good options in the works right now, but I'm also enjoying a little bit of airspace, enjoying some time on my bicycle. It's the first time that I've had 3 months without a full-time job since I've been 16 years old, so I'm kind of enjoying.
Yeah, well, it is. We'll come on to that later, but it is that case of just trying to find that nice balance between kind of, keeping active, keeping busy, keeping yourself, career-wise busy, but also starting to kind of recognize that, okay, I don't have to be, full time at this, 12 hours a day. I can spend some time on my bike and do some nice things.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to find that balance. That's something that I've always stressed personally and with my team, is to find that life-work balance. And I think we were really successful over the last 22 years at Stewart. The team that we started with 22 years ago was in place the day that we turned the lights off. So it's something I'm really proud of.
Oh, excellent. Brilliant.
We built a good team. They were really supportive, and I think they were a big part of its success. And we were all together until the very end.
So when I met you first a couple of years ago, I always thought that you were a Polish guy who spoke really good English and had spent some time in the US, but it then transpired that you were born in the US, you went to college in the US, and then you later decided to trace your ancestral Polish roots back to Poland with the help of Mr. Marriott, who we spoke about, all the way back in 1985. Now, I'm not going to tell you what age I was at that time, but can you tell us a bit about that story? Because it's a fascinating journey story.
Well, it is true that I am the grandson of Polish immigrants, hence my name. In fact, that's why everyone calls me TK, because in America, no one could ever pronounce the name Klodowski. So it's a name that I was given my freshman year at Cornell University. When I was registering my first day, they said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Tomasz Klodowski." "What's your name?" "Tomasz Klodowski." And they put a sticker on me, "Hello, my name is TK." And ever since day one at university, I've been TK, and the nickname has served me well over the years. But post-graduation, I worked for Accenture for 4 years, and then I transitioned to the Marriott Corporation. I was a hotel and finance major at Cornell. They have a specialty program in hotels. And I was working for Marriott at the time. And my journey to Poland started in a conference room. I happened to be sitting across the table from Bill Marriott. And it was a break, and he and I were having...
So Bill Marriott is the Mr. Marriott?
The Mr. Marriott
right,
of Marriott Corporation. This was, 35 years ago. So it was a point where he was much more accessible than he would be these days, when the company, I think, had 6 hotels internationally when I came over. But he and I were having a conversation. He asked me about my career and was quite interested in what I saw as my track going forward. And he asked me if I ever worked in a hotel. And I said, actually, no, I hadn't. I'd done some internships during university, but I always worked at the corporate level. And he said, son, at this corporation, you'll always have a black mark on your forehead if you haven't spent your time in the trenches working at a property. And I said, Mr. Marriott, I'm 30 years old. I'm single. There's nothing that's keeping me in Washington. Why not? He said, well, where would you like to go? And I said, I haven't really thought about it. And I said, can I have a few days? I came back a few days later. I sat with him. He says, have you decided? And I said, yes, I'd like to go to Warsaw, Poland. And he looked at me and he said, you're the first guy to ever volunteer to go there. So they put me on a 6-month training program. I transitioned to the Warsaw Marriott.
So the Warsaw Marriott was already open at this time?
It was already open.
Yeah.
It was the year was 1991. They had opened, I think, in 88. And I came in as assistant controller, and within 6 months, I was made director of finance, and then member of the board for both the office tower and the hotel. And it was a great time in Polish history. The Berlin Wall had come down, and the Warsaw Marriott was the center of Polish commerce in those early years. And I got a chance to meet some amazing people that were, some of them still active in the real estate market today. But it was really the center of the universe for the Polish
that
emerging
was like
economy.
the first kind of big international hotel in
Yes,
Warsaw. So
yes.
all the kind of big diplomatic meetings, all the
Absolutely.
everything was happening there at that time.
Yeah. So to have that position, it was probably one of the most prominent positions within the institutional sector. And I was 31 years old and a bachelor. So it was a great time in Poland for me.
So the decision to choose Poland, obviously there was the ancestral element to that, but I assume that wasn't entirely the decision.
You know, I was a junior vice president at the time at Marriott, and I had to take a big step down to make the transition to operations. So I said, well, if I'm going to make this change, I should do it in the most challenging environment possible. So at the time, Marriott had 6 international hotels, and I was given the choice between Vienna and Warsaw. And everyone thought I would take Vienna or opt for Vienna, but Warsaw seemed like a much bigger challenge, and I never regretted my decision.
Brilliant. So between Marriott and Stewart, then there are a few things that we'll kind of gloss over, but I really wanted to get into when you started with Stewart, because I remember, again, going back a couple of years ago, and you told me this story of and it's one of my favorite stories of your career when you joined Stewart Title initially. Your job description was, and correct me if I'm wrong, was basically to sell apartment insurance policies for like 100 zloty a policy. And within a few months later, you had flipped the script of the business, and you were basically selling commercial property insurance titles for like $100,000. So, and that was the start of an extremely successful and lucrative career for you at Stewart.
Yeah, as a little bit of a backstory, after my days at Marriott, I worked alongside Brian Patterson, who I still consider to be one of the most important mentors of my life. I probably learned more working with Brian than I did at Cornell and Accenture combined. So I was 6 years with Brian in the team when it was then AIG Lincoln, now White Star, was getting its start. It was really an amazing time to experience real estate development through the eyes of probably one of the best developers in Central and Eastern Europe and most successful. I transitioned after 6 years with Brian, supporting my wife in a very upmarket furniture adventure. Unfortunately, we opened it a bit ahead of the market, and we had our grand opening the week of 9/11. So as a result, the market didn't support what we were trying to do. And my wife suggested that I find a real job. The gentleman who was running Stewart at the time had been with the group for 3 years, again with the focus of selling residential title policy similar to what they do in the U.S. Again, with a target selling at $100 or euros per policy. And after 3 years, they hadn't sold even one. So as I was brought in and I started to look at the business model, my colleague at the time decided to move back to the U.S. after 9/11, so he left me in charge of the operation. And after 3 or 4 weeks of really understanding the business and the business model, I called my boss and I said, listen, this vision is never going to work. So I know I took this job and you gave me an opportunity, but if this is your focus, it doesn't make sense. I can finish out the year and pack my bags and, no hard feelings between us both. And he was a bit surprised and shocked. And he says, well, if it were you, what would you do? And I said, well, listen, I think the market is getting ready to explode with offices, hotels, warehouses, and retail. So if it were me, I would abandon this residential title model and start to focus on commercial. And I said, if you give me 2 weeks, I'll come up with a business plan, fly back to Houston. If you like it, we'll go forward. If not, we can shake hands and part ways. So I made the pitch. They liked it. And we were off and running. In fact, the very first deals that we did. The very first deal that I did was Liberty Corner with Sven van der Heijden. He was always a bit of a pioneer. And follow that up with Christian Feuchtel's deal, the Intercontinental Hotel. So within the first 6 months of launching this concept of institutional title, we had issued almost 1 million euros worth of invoices.
Wow.
So we were off and running. And Carl Wilson was also a big part of the success of the group, because the German banks, which were the primary source of lending capital at the time, were really struggling with the 18-month delay to get debt registered in the perpetual books to secure their position. So the German lending banks were quickly reaching their capacity because they had these commitments which weren't registered. So Carl said, if you can come up with a concept that will allow us to secure this registration, we can exponentially increase capital flows into the market. And I think it was one of the first big breakthroughs in the Polish real estate development business. And then Carl's vision and what Stewart was able to provide, this gap insurance, within another 3 months, we were a standard term sheet item of every German lender, and our business just exploded. Every German bank was taking the policy. So not only were we getting the title insurance, we were also getting the lender's policy as well. But one of the stories that I like to tell is before we had our first transaction or our first client, the hardest thing is always getting, your first deal. And so we had a conference room, and we needed some pictures on the wall. So I called the advertising director from Stewart's home office in Houston, and she sent me some pictures of McDonald's and some of the other big corporate institutional clients that would have some recognition in Poland. And every time I did a deal, we would replace one of the historical photos with one of the deals that we had done. But, when the first question anyone ever would ask was, who are some of your clients? And we don't have any clients. It's really hard to tap dance around it. But once I had the first client, I had a buyer, a seller, a lender, and a lawyer for each of those. So I had then 6 clients. And after the first deal, at the second deal, I had 12 clients. And so I was able to, as Brian Patterson taught me, tell the truth optimally about my client base, and kind of the rest is history.
So, because I'm curious then, because obviously that's what Stewart were doing in the US already. So, and they were present in Poland before you joined. So why didn't they adopt that same business model in Poland initially, and why did it take so long for you, or not take so long for you, but take them so long to recognize through you then this was the way forward here?
I think that's one of the mistakes that a lot of people make, is that they try and base business in a new market modeled after the success they have in their home market. And I think that was one of the value adds that I brought, is that I was an expat, but I had lived and worked in Poland for 10 years prior. So I kind of knew the market. I knew every developer, lawyer, and banker in the market, and I kind of knew what they were looking for, where the other guy was listening to all the input that was coming in from the US. And Stewart's business model is probably 70% residential title insurance, because it's a standard requirement of any residential deal in the U.S. But again, the model is different. They don't have notaries. I think the risk profile is different. Yeah. And Polish are very cautious in how they spend their money. And if you're spending your last 50 or 100,000 on an apartment, which was the selling price of flats at the time, nobody wanted to spend 100 or 200 euros on something that they didn't feel that they needed. So it was an uphill battle that I didn't see a way forward. And even today, residential title insurance isn't a thing in the Polish market.
Yeah, that's very true. So that's quite an amazing story. And as I said, they started off with something that, as you said, was never really going to work long term. And you were able to take that platform, and then, with the help of guys like Carl Wilson and these guys, kind of explode that, which is brilliant. And as you said, led to an amazing career, an amazing group of people that you worked with. You made a lot of amazing friendships along the way as well, and as I said at the start, you're one of probably the most liked person in real estate. You have friends in every corner of real estate, and that's something I wanted to talk to you about as well, because you and I operate in the same real estate ecosystem, but from slightly different angles. Obviously, you're ensuring the backbone of real estate transactions, and I'm focused on securing the talent that drives them. So, we're the mechanics, we're the behind the scenes folks. We know that without solid title deals, without solid title work, deals can crumble, and without the right people, companies can't scale. So we're both, in essence, essential cogs in this complex machine. And it strikes me that while the spotlight often shines on those directly involved in the transactions, the contributions of service providers like ourselves can often be overlooked or even undervalued. So this brings me to a question, and I know that this is something that resonates among many service providers because this topic has come up before. So have you, in your experience, encountered situations where your expertise or the value that you bring has felt somewhat diminished simply because you're operating in a service capacity rather than leading the transaction?
I think that's a great question, and I think that's something that a lot of us in this sort of service provider segment feel. And I can say that in the beginning of my career at Stewart, title insurance was such a critical part of getting a deal done that I felt that it was I was always a really integral part of the transaction, and that every closing dinner there was the private equity guy, the broker, and the title person. They were always invited to the closing dinner because it was such an integral part of what we were doing. And I felt that I was really always part of that inner circle. But as the market has developed and sort of matured, I think title insurance has become kind of just a check the box issue. And so the profile of our involvement has, I wouldn't say it isn't any less important, but I think that it's one of the 15 boxes that need to be checked to get a deal done. But I think if you put your ego aside there, I mean, if one puts their ego aside and know their place and know what they're doing is of top quality, they're providing great service. And, there's some great examples in the market today of, like, David Yearn is one of my favorites, where he's a guy who's transitioned from the title sector to brokerage. And it's a guy, he's somebody who is very successful in the title sector and has taken and leveraged that skill set and is probably the leading broker in Central and Eastern Europe as a result. So I think that it's just a matter of, I would say, kind of accepting your role within that wheel, that you are a certain cog of that wheel. But I have to say that I've had a very fulfilling and successful career. I can pick up the phone and speak with almost any lawyer, banker, or deal guy, even today. And I think people like yourself and David and some of the leading lawyers will always have that place in people's minds. And I think that people may not really appreciate what we do until we don't do it, or they need us, and or there's an issue. But I think that it's something that I realized over the last 10 years, as the market was maturing and we suffered through both Brexit and the COVID crisis, that it's those relationships that are made, that are solidified, that will continue to support people, whether they're on the top ring within the food chain of a transaction or someplace from a support level. But having those relationships, being a quality service provider, and always being consistent and making sure your clients get what they need and get the deal closed, that always comes back and pays dividends.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've been a big inspiration for me over the years as well on that subject, because I always, particularly in my earlier years, starting off when I set up my business, and my focus was to provide headhunting exclusively for the real estate sector. So I was in there, I was living, I was breathing it. Everybody I spoke to every day, there were real estate people, be they transactions people, development people, lawyers, whatever, bankers. But I always still felt a little bit outside the circle. Even so much so that I went and I did like a full real estate degree from the University of Reading, just to help myself feel a bit more comfortable, and particularly in terminology and stuff like that, which was great, But then what I realized when I got to, know you a bit better, and I saw that it doesn't really matter what type of service that you're providing. Um, uh, they're all essential services, and if you can provide a really, really good service and be really efficient, and people will respect that, and they will value that. And I saw with your parties, and that was like, when I look at those parties, be it the Thanksgiving parties that you have at your home, or your parties at Expo or MIPIM, and you call them Stewart parties, but they weren't Stewart parties; they were TK parties, because people came to see you. They didn't come because, I have an invite from Stewart. It's I have an invite from TK. That's nice. I want to go and see TK. And
it's really flattering, and I have to say that that party initiative really exploded to something bigger than I ever thought that could be. It all started just after the real estate crisis, I think in the early 16s, and no one was having parties. Everyone was going through a crisis, and I said, "Listen, we'll have a party." So we started this concept with a wine bar, and the first one was with Expo Real, which was a bit strange, having a wine party at Expo Real, and then that followed on in Cannes. And the first party we had, I don't know, 50 or 60 people. And I remember I was leaving at 1 o'clock in the morning, and there were cars still dropping people off, saying it was the party of the year. And from there, it just exploded. And that was followed on by our Thanksgiving event. I remember the first one we had, core group of people, friends that I still have today. It was, I think, 5 or 6 families. Everyone talked about it. The next year we had 50 people, and it ended up the last year we had 180 people at our home, with a big tent on the side of the house and catering. And the party went until 4 o'clock in the morning. The entire neighborhood knew when it was TK's Thanksgiving party, because there were cars parked around the block. It's something similar to the U.S. Embassy and their 4th of July party. So I have a lot of great memories of those events. We always tried to give back to the market. The market always supported us, and it was probably the best marketing spend on the planet. Those events where you could get 150 of the most influential deal people across Central and Eastern Europe at your event, and everyone wanted an invite for it. Yeah. The phone was ringing 3-4 weeks before MIPIM or Expo, asking for an invite to that event. So that's probably what I miss the most of this new transition.
I was just going to say to you, because that's definitely something you're going to miss, having that. And it's not about you being the the party host or the spotlight. It's just about having that opportunity to have all those people come to your home, and for you to be able to catch up with them, or catch up with them. Still go to Expo and whatnot, but particularly the Thanksgiving one. Well, maybe you'll do it on a more smaller private scale.
I mean, the problem is, regarding Thanksgiving, I always run up to our house in Marbella, because if I have that event, and if I have 10 people, there's another 10 that are offended. If I have 20 people, there's another 20 that are offended. So it wasn't physically possible for me to do that on a smaller scale, because the network is so, has expanded so much that there's always somebody that's going to be offended. So if I'm not here, I don't offend anyone.
Yeah. Good plan. Well, we're going to miss them anyway. So, so kind of moving on, and as we talk, you are kind of in a transition at the moment, and congratulations on your recent milestone birthday and the incredible 22 years you spent with Stewart. So, as you embark on this new chapter of your life, and I know you have no intention of slowing down, you're still full of energy, you're still full of life. Many people I talk to who reach this stage find themselves at an interesting crossroads, which are filled with both new possibilities and, perhaps more surprisingly, some unexpected societal narratives about career and about contribution. So given your continued energy and drive, I'm curious about your perspective on this, as you explore what's next. Have you noticed any subtle shifts, perhaps in expectations or opportunities? And on the flip side then, with such a wealth of experience that you have, what unique strengths and insights do you think you can bring to the table now?
That's an interesting question. And as I mentioned earlier in the interview, this is the first time that I've taken 3 months off, or I've had a 3 month period where I haven't had a job since I was 16 years old. I've always worked. I started my first job 3 days after I graduated from university, and I've never been without a position in the last 45 years. So I purposely decided to take these 3 months without even sticking my toe in the water for anything new, just to see what it's like. And as everyone sort of predicted, after 3 to 4 months of doing all the things, the travel, riding my bike, visiting the things, and spending time with family, both at home and locally with my kids at university, I'm kind of ready to jump back into the mix. So I'm just starting that process now. But to your point, I do feel that when one is in their 60s and looking for a new position, you are often perceived with a very different perspective. I did have one professional meeting with a recruiter in London for a position, and one of the first questions they asked is like, "This is a really important and big position with a lot of work, at this stage of your life and everything that you accomplished. Are you really up for 5 years of such a grind?" And it's something that really made me pause and think, because it is true. After having worked so hard for so many years to build a business and sustain it, there's a point where you want to sort of catch your breath and smell the roses. But on the other hand, I think that it's also really important, and I can feel it now, that to keep fresh, to keep reading, to keep engaged, go to those meetings, go to those lunches, because you find that the phone stops ringing, the emails stop coming in, and after 3 or 4 months of that, you kind of miss the buzz of being relevant, I guess. Yeah. And so, but to your point, I do think that a lot of corporate entities shy away from this is experience factor of somebody who's in their 60s. But I think that the wealth of knowledge that a mature executive brings is can't be undervalued. And I also think that people at this stage maybe aren't looking for that big paycheck as much as they're looking for just a professional challenge. And I think that's something that is more important for me, the challenge, rather than the size of the paycheck. But I think there's a place for us, but I also do feel and sense that there is a real sort of ageism bias in the market today as people get older. But as you mentioned, I turned 65 last year. I rode 6,500 kilometers to commemorate on my bicycle. So I'm trying to stay fit, stay active, and if any advice I can give to this younger generation that's coming up is to keep yourself fit, watch your diet, get plenty of sleep, because getting older sneaks up on you quite quicker than you think. But if you're healthy and you're fit, it makes a lot of those decisions and these decades in your life much easier to manage.
It's really interesting, and I totally agree with you. And it's quite interesting. So obviously I'm in the headhunting space, so I get a lot of people coming to me and saying, "Mark, I'm changing jobs, or I'm looking at something new." But I do I have had quite a few people in their mid-60s, come to me and say, "Well, look, I'm moving out of this thing and I'm trying to find something else. This project is finished, and so we've finished the project, and now I'm in between jobs, and I'm really struggling to find something." And I think a lot of people find it really difficult to understand. Okay, what is it about 65? What is it about that magic number that companies and society in general just said, "Oh, well, it's time for you to go and relax," and guys like yourselves who've looked after your body, and your mind really well, who are still full of energy and as you say, can go out and ride a bike for 6,500 kilometers. These guys aren't ready to stop. These guys aren't ready to slow down. We're all living much longer than we were 20 years ago. And it's really interesting because I was speaking with at a meeting with a longevity expert recently, and she told me that number, that retirement age of 65 was something that was established in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. A bit like BMI when the actuaries were trying to create the for life insurance, trying to calculate the precise or a range of life expectancy, they use BMI as a tool. But again, it was developed in the 1950s. It's not relevant to our lifestyle today. And again, so we're with the advent of better diet, better education, better health. We're living much longer. We're living till our 90s. So who's going to sit around from 65 to 90 and just do nothing. That's no,
it's really interesting. And prior to this interview, when you and I talked about some of the discussion topics, I did a bit of research and looked into that. Some of the most important and significant businesses that were started by people that were over 60 years old. And Kentucky Fried Chicken was started by Colonel Sanders when he was 65. Ray Kroc started McDonald's when he was 61. And one of the most inspiring stories I read about recently was Jack Ryan, who started Aon, who retired at the age of 60. In the last decade, has started and grown Ryan Transactional Insurance business to a market cap of $20 billion in his 60th decade. So I have to say that I think the future is bright. There's a lot of talent. There's an awful lot of ambition and a lot of experience that can be that's ready to be deployed. So I'm really looking forward to this next chapter. Probably the most exciting part of my life.
And that's really interesting what you mentioned about those guys, because I did not know that. And that was something I was thinking about earlier as well, because, you hit this age and you kind of start, I guess the two questions you ask yourself is, one, do I want to go back into a corporate slog? I can do it. I know I can do it. But do I want to go back into that? And then the flip side of that is, okay, if I don't do that, but I still have all this energy, I still have to point it somewhere. So maybe I'll start something myself. And then the question is, how much energy and effort and heartbreak that could potentially be. And the question, do I really want to do that? So what is there a third option?
No, I think that's those are the balls that I've been juggling over the last 3 months and trying to, as I said, figure out this next chapter. But it's really true. It's a balance. One of the startling statistics that I read as one reaches the age of retirement is that the average person collects a pension for 11 and a half years after retirement. So there is, even with all of these the advances in longevity, I think people's life and lifestyles and diets in general across the population have not been as healthy as in years past. There's an awful lot of obesity in the market. So I think that it's a balance of trying to stay active and keep your mind engaged, but also facing the reality that, if you look at it, it's just a pure numbers game. After the age of 65, the average longevity for a male is, 77, 78 years old. So, if you're healthy, and my dad just turned 96, my mom turned 90 yesterday. So,
wow.
I've got a good gene pool, so I'm kind of looking forward to ride that wave. But I think that, the reality is just, looking inside yourself and determining, what's best. So,
and it's not for everybody, because look, there are people, we both seen this, who hit 65 and they are genuinely knackered.
Right. Yeah.
They're done.
Right.
And that's a combination of working their ass off, to pay the mortgage, to bring up the kids, send the kids to college, all the hours that God can send them, and then just not looking after themselves, not looking after their diet, not looking after their health, not looking after their mobility. And I think mobility is a massive one in this, because, I think, certainly my generation now, we're much more aware of this. We're much more aware of the fact that we are probably going to live, with a decent gene pool, we are probably going to live on average into our 90s. But mobility can go at 60.
Right.
So you've got 30 years then to hobble around and not have the energy, not have the ambition or the mobility to do something. So it's really, it's something that myself, and I know a lot of my friends were I'm 45, so we're very conscious of this now, and it's saying, okay, you've got to, it's not just about hitting 65 and saying, right, I'm done, because that's, that's in the past, I think. So it's an interesting one.
And I think society has really kind of opened its arms to this gray generation, and I think the successes that a lot of people have had, in this at this phase or stage of their life, kind of supports that it makes sense. But I think most importantly, it's just keeping your mind active, keeping your mind engaged, and I think that's what I missed the most in the last 3 months is just feeling this challenge of having technical issues to solve or problems to figure out, and that's what I'm kind of anxious to get back to.
And I know a lot of people at this age as well. They a very good alternative for them is board roles, because you can bring in that 40 years of experience, 45 years of experience that you have. And you can do that a couple of days a week or a couple of hours a week or whatever, and still be able to contribute, and still be able to pick up a bit of a paycheck as well for your time.
Yeah, I mean, I think charting an ideal course forward. If I could find a couple of interesting and appropriate board positions, that would be an ideal transition into this into this next chapter. But right now, as I said, I'm looking at a few different options and way forward. My wife and I had a very successful residential development business, so we're sort of toying around with that idea to getting back into that business. Private equity is something that I've also played around with, so I'm looking at some options and opportunities there. But I think board roles are really fulfilling for people at this stage in life, because they feel they can share their expertise, they can lend perspective to the younger generation who's growing or trying to manage or push forward in a new business enterprise. So it's something that I would also welcome.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to hire TK in a board role, please contact me so I can get a massive fee out of it. So listen, this has been brilliant. Thank you so much. We've covered a lot today and a lot of kind of important topics as well. And as I said, I know you have a lot of friends out there, and I'm sure a lot of them would be very keen just to hear and a lot of people know your story anyway, but for anybody who doesn't, it is a fascinating story. So listen, thanks very much for doing this. Great to see you.
Mark, thanks very much for having me, and I just like to make a shout out to the market out there. I really appreciate the support that everyone has given me over these last 22 years. It's been a great ride. We've done a lot of amazing projects. I've met a lot of fantastic people, worked hard to support them, and they've also worked hard to support us. So just wanted to give a big thanks to everyone for all they've done over the last 20 years.
And I'm sure the market can reciprocate with appreciation for you and all you've done for the market, and the friendship that you've given to the market as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Take care.
Cheers. Thank you.